Hi, CDPD 500 students. I'm Josh. It's a little weird introducing myself to some of you who I know quite intimately, who I teach in CDPD and SCMP, but there's one cohort who I don't get a chance to work with yet. So, yeah, hi. The point of this lecture is it's meant to be interactive. I'm going to pause throughout, have you watch some videos, get some videos of my kids in here, watch a little uh, TED Talk, and have Jamboard opportunities for you to have conversations in breakout rooms. And all this will articulate towards this week's vlog. Um, the big frame is wanting to look at balanced literacy and wanting to look at literacy practice um, in an elementary school. Where does this knowledge come from? This is kind of, I guess, my experience and my knowledge and expertise on this topic. That comes from my studies in learning sciences. It comes from working with my own kids, my children, who I'm going to introduce you to shortly. And it comes from my experience in K-12 schools. I've taught kindergarten and grade 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I've been a school-based leader, an instructional leader, and a system leader, and I've gotten to do, in those roles, I've gotten to spend lots of time in other people's classrooms and in a variety of schools, and paying attention to how schools and teachers support literacy. And yeah, I've worked in special education settings, and I've worked in a wide variety of elementary classrooms, and I hope to kind of share with you a bit of what I've gleaned and stolen from my colleagues and peers. It's important to contextualize that this is really only a primer, right? Like just a start at trying to paint the landscape of this work, your work ahead. After this class today, it'll articulate forward to your vlog, where really we're just going to ask you to frame what kind of questions you have and what kind of learning you need to do out of kind of the exploration we do together today. Then our next class, you're going to get a chance to roll up your sleeves and build a lesson plan for literacy, specifically for my children as your target audience, as your students, so that you can build on what you hear from them today and see them actually reading and some samples of their work the next day to plan for them. And then this CDPD 500 is an introduction, right? Then you're going to go to your practicum, and I really encourage you to use literacy as a key lens for your own professional learning in your practicum. You get a chance to work with small groups more in your practicum than you'll get following, because lots of times your partner teacher will be leading the whole class. So it's going to be a fantastic chance for you to dig into working with kids on their reading and their writing at the elbow, which is the most important place to teach and learn about teaching reading and writing. You're also going to see how your partner teacher structures his or her classroom, what resources they use, what assessments they use, and how that works. So part of my goal today is to just give you enough, or today and our next class is to give you enough of a lens to know some of the questions to ask, some of the things to consider. Yeah, it's more a long picture view. I don't want you to think that that you always want to be stuck looking at the forest. You also got to dive down and work in the trees. I kind of liken it sometimes to if you're traveling through an uncertain terrain, you want to both be looking up regularly to see where you're headed, and then also looking down at your next steps to make sure that you're taking good ones. So it's both those things together. Today is more focused on the big picture, and then the next day is more focused on the individual steps. And we'll kind of go back and forth between those things. And lastly, in CDPD 600, we're going to dig into literacy in a big way, and you're going to have an opportunity to build more of like a program unit approach to how you bring literacy to your students. Okay, so that's what we're about today. Without further ado, let's jump to the slides. Okay, I'm actually going to start with the very last slide first, so you know where we're headed. By the end of today, I want you to be able to think about why, how, and what balanced literacy entails. And I also, probably most importantly, want you to have a start for what practices you want to explore further, and what learning do you feel like you need to do. Because the trap here is thinking that I could teach you everything you need to know about teaching reading. That's not the intent. It's much more, as I suggested before, to get you started on your journey and to know that this is a professional learning goal that I have 20 years into being an elementary teacher, and there's so much focus and opportunity for me to learn about how to do this well. And so you need to think of it as, the start of a professional long journey towards creating conditions for students to be successful with literacy in your classroom and beyond. So here we go. I just want to start with a few big ideas, and I think this one is really important. Humility towards this work. People sort of want an easy solution. Well, tell me how to teach kids to read, and we want brain image scanning and research to be able to tell us exactly what we need to do. And while there's lots that those things can tell us about what we can do, it's really important to also recognize that reading and what the brain does when it reads and how it comes to learn to read is really complex. And there's been a lot of research on this, and we're going to build on that research in our work, and teachers certainly do. But it's also important to recognize that it's because it's something that's so complex, and it's not about linear inputs and outputs. You don't want to think about controlling, if I just do these things, then kids are going to learn to read, and these are the things that we're going to do, and then everybody will read. The truth is there's a lot of variables at play in learning to read, and a lot of complexity. And so while we have some really important key strategies we know make a big difference for a lot of kids, we definitely also know that the same things don't work for the same kids at the same times, and that's really important to hold in mind. So humility and a recognition that this is complex is an important big frame. Kind of falling out connected to that is this idea that students learn to read at very different times and in different ways. And you see this as a parent with a lot of phenomena, and as a teacher with a lot of phenomena. For example, if you get together at a first-year birthday party with a bunch of other kids that are about the same age, parents are often, kind of not wanting to, but inevitably compare their kids, and they look at who's crawling and who's walking and who's using their first words, and it's often all over the map. And I remember my son Joe. He was really slow with movement. He was kind of you're going to meet him here in a minute, and he was a really big baby with lots of Michelin man sort of baby fat arms, and he wasn't crawling, and at like 8 months, and some other kids. My daughter had before him, Micah, who you'll also meet. She started walking just at like 8.5 months, and he wasn't even crawling. He was just kind of laying on the floor. And I remember thinking to myself, even though I know all that I know about child development, thinking to myself, oh geez, what's going on here with Joe? You fast forward to Joe's 3rd birthday, and he got a 2-wheeler bike and was riding it down the street by the end of that day, without training wheels or anything, all by himself, making the corner, coming back, which just blew my mind. Whereas my daughter, who's Micah, who was 2.5 years older than him, had just recently kind of accomplished that same feat. So it's not linear. So he made, he may have been really slow with getting to crawl, and then made some big, improvements, jumped up, and then surprised me with what he could do, and how quickly certain things come together. And so it's really important to remember that it's not a linear trajectory. And for learning to read, My wife, who taught grade 1 for her whole career, she's now at home with our kids, but for her teaching career, taught grade 1. Um, she used to look at um, the teeth of kids if they lost their first teeth as a one indicator of readiness to read. Incidentally, as you meet Joe today, he hasn't lost any of his teeth yet. Um, and the other thing to keep in mind is that the ages of kids in our grades are all over the map too. There's so even though at this very same developmental age, kids have different things that they're doing at different times. On top of that, you'll have a spread of like 18 months of age difference within your classroom. And so then that gets amplified to having like a massive spectrum of different stages of reading within any grade, kindergarten 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 classroom. You'll have kids at varying different stages, and a huge part of this work is understanding that is going to be the case, and it shouldn't even be thought of as ahead and behind. Because it's not a competition between one another, it's an ongoing process of growth. And so holding in mind that your students are different, they need some different things to be successful, and they're going to be at on different timelines for the development of their skills, and that those timelines will not always be linear. These are all insights that I want you to really frame when you think about how you structure literacy in your classroom, and we're going to show you more about how to do that in a minute. Right now, what I want you to do is I'm going to bring that to life a little bit by having some quick interviews. Well, maybe not so quick. I'm going to get you to meet 2 of my children, actually 3 of my children. It says Mike and Joe, but I have a quick one of Ted, and he's 4. Joe is 7, and Mike is 9, and they're going to talk to you a little bit about their reading journeys and who they are as readers. As I said, you're going to design for this later, but right now what I want you to listen for afterwards, I want you to write down any quotes or insights that you hear them say, and then you're going to develop some insight statements together in a breakout room with these prompts students need and teachers need. So right now, while you're listening to these students talk about their learning journey towards literacy, I'd like you to write down any quotes or insights that come for you, and then we'll share those in a small group. Okay, here they are. Hi, Maeve. What's the story you just read? What's it about? Can you tell me about it? Who's in the story?
The baby bunny.
Is there anybody else in the story?
The mother bunny.
Mother bunny? Is there anybody else in the story? Baby bunny and a mommy bunny? And what happens in the story?
The baby bunny runs away.
The baby bunny runs away. Yeah. And how does the problem get solved?
Like that.
Like that? You close the book? What does George do to get the baby bunny back?
He gets the mommy and run to the hole and saw baby bunny and take it out.
Oh, do you like this story, May?
Yeah.
Do you like reading?
Yeah.
How many books have you read?
1, 2.
1, 2? Is there anything else you want to tell us about reading?
Yeah.
Who reads to you?
Mom and Dad.
Anybody else?
Micah.
Thanks for being on our video today.
Okay.
Bye. Hi, Ted.
Hi.
How old are you?
5.
Tell me about what you like about reading.
Listen when you practically like around the wall without even leaving your house.
What are some of your favorite books that you read?
That I'm reading?
Sure. What's one of your favorites that you're reading right now?
The book of Narnia.
You're reading a book of Narnia? What happens in that book?
They make these nice beavers and a whole bunch of things. It's very hard to explain.
What do you like about it?
It's like accurate and magical, but not that magical. Not too accurate. It's just my thing.
And why do you think reading is important? Do you want to learn to read?
And I want to learn to read, and it teaches you a few things.
Yeah, it sure does. Thanks for answering these questions. Okay, can you start by introducing yourself? What's your name?
Joe.
And how old are you, Joe?
7.
What grade are you in?
2. Grade 2.
What do you like most about reading?
Because it tells me stories usually.
What are some of the...
And sometimes you need it to do things in your life.
Oh, like what kind of things?
Like, usually you have to read things to be able to walk.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So tell me, what are some of the... Can you remember some of your favorite books that you've read?
Lightning Thief.
The Lightning Thief? What's that about?
It's about a boy that is half. He's a half blood, and there's 3 daughters. I forget their names because they're kind of confusing. One's Hades, and then the Hades is in underwater, and there's one that's in the sky, another dog that's in the ocean, which he is. And then he found out, and then when he like touches water, when he's like hot and he touches water or something, he'll heal. And first, there's this monster. He was in this boarding school, and one of the teachers was a monster, and that's from Hades. And then they try to get and then he eventually gets to half-blood hair. There's all other half-bloods, and then he meets a friend. What was her name?
Annabeth?
Yeah, Annabeth, and a guy named Grover that he's half human and half goat.
So...
And then they go on an adventure trying to find the lightning bolt before the summer solstice.
Yeah, that's a good recap of the story. What did you like about... Why did you like that story?
Because there's lots of, there's always something, kind of scary, something happening. Most of it is, exciting. Not in some books, that right at the start of it, it's not that exciting.
Right. How many books do you think you've read, or had read to you? What would you guess?
About 150 or something. Mike has probably read about 1,000 or something.
Right.
I'm not sure, maybe more.
And you're learning to read books right now, aren't you?
Yeah.
So what? Tell me how you read. What are you doing to learn how to read?
Every day I try to read read for about 20 minutes and read a book to you. And also one thing that helps me is not just reading a book, but I do reading walks. So this, like, I practice reading some words and doing like things with words, and like, and sometimes, like, since not that long ago, it was what was it called again? The time where they had where the World War One ended.
Oh, Remembrance Day?
Yeah, well, Remembrance Day. Mom wrote a famous poem, and then I read it a couple of times. Then I used some of the words for it and made my own poem.
It's a good example of word work. What do you like learning to read?
Yeah, it's kind of fun, but not too fun because I'm learning to read.
Oh, so sometimes it's hard?
Yeah, but it's okay. Sometimes it's easier when I'm just in a better mood.
So you have lots of emotions when you're learning to read?
Yeah, when I'm like trying to read it, and then some days I'm just like, oh, I have to do my reading, and then I do it, and it's a bit harder for me. And
what advice would you give to a teacher who's learning how to teach people to read? What do you think they need to know about that?
Maybe at first just practice reading some of the words, not reading a book. And probably the first books that you read should have a bit of rhyme to it. So then they kind of remember the rhyme, and then it rhymes, and it helps me a bit.
So when you don't know a word, what do you do? If you're reading a book and you don't know a word.
Look at it and see if I've read a word that rhymed to it not that long ago, or try to sound it out.
Is there anything else you do? Do you ever look at the pictures?
Yeah, sometimes look at the pictures. And it's also good to start with a book that has lots of pictures, so then if they have that tricky word, they can look at the picture and be like, if it was that wouldn't go with the picture, so it must be this. And then they'll look, and then they see, if they maybe see that word again, they'll know, oh, it's that word.
So what are some of the things
if you look at it for a minute?
When you're learning to read like that, what are some of the things that mom or dad do to help you that work? You said that you sit with us and read for 20 minutes. What do you think we're doing that's helping you?
Oh, sitting with me and just doing it, and sometimes they write, lots of times they write things for me to read.
Right. Is there anything we do that doesn't help or that bothers you, or you'd like us to stop doing?
Maybe try to sound it out, even though I am trying to sound it out, and and I'm doing that, and I have to start talking a bit about. I have to say, yeah, don't, and then I'm not thinking about it as much, and it gets me in a bit bad, not as good mood, so I can't read the rest of the book as easily.
That's good feedback. Okay, well, next time we start a video here, we're going to get you to read for us. Thanks for answering questions about your reading. Hi, what's your name?
Micah.
How old are you, Micah?
I'm 9 years old.
What grade are you in?
4. Grade 4.
We're going to talk a little bit about your literacy today. We'll start with reading. What do you like about reading?
Well, I love the adventure I read a lot. I just like leap into books. I just love, like, I become like I'm in the book watching the whole thing play out. I just love the stories.
What are some of your favorite kinds of books?
Adventure and magic.
How do you pick a good book?
I see if there's some series that I already like and find a book in them. Or I also look at a series and then find a book series or a book that's kind of like that book. But I always like testing out new books.
What are some of your favorite series that you've read? Just name a couple of them, maybe.
Harry Potter. All 7 of them. I've read them all. The Little House on the Prairie series by Laura Ingalls Wilder.
And how many books do you think you've read? You were going to estimate.
8,065 or something.
Okay. And how often?
Or 800
how much
maybe.
How much do you read a day? Would you say? How many minutes or how many hours? On average.
An hour and a half or more, maybe.
Some days more, some days less.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about how you learned to read?
I just mostly remember loving stories a lot. So I'd always be looking at books and looking at the words and trying to read them. And eventually I could just read.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about writing. What are you working on with your writing these days?
I've been writing folk tales. I've been reading folk tales and then I have some questions and I write out my answers in full sentences.
What do you like about writing?
I don't like it that much, but I like how I like how you can do anything. When I'm just doing free writing, I feel like the words just flow.
You and your friend Vita were writing a novel recently, weren't you?
Yeah, we're working on it.
What did you like about that?
I really like the magic in it and adventure, which is my thing.
So your writing kind of flows from your reading, you think?
Yeah.
So you brought a little bit of writing for us now.
Yeah.
What is
Why is magic an important part of the story? It's a question from the Helpful Badger, a folktale.
Okay, and you're gonna just a paragraph.
Magic is an important part of the story because the badgers use magic to say thank you for the food in a dream, and being grateful is very important. Magic is also important because the transformation that the badgers use to protect them. In the story, you can see how important it was to the badgers they can transform.
Okay, and what do you think you need to work on most with your writing? Do you have any goals for your writing?
I'd like to try to write a short book on my own before I turn 10.
Okay. Is
Picture
there any
book.
specific parts of your writing that you feel like need more work, or that you want to explore more?
My penmanship. Right now it's a bit messy. I'd like it to get neater.
Sometimes it frustrates you when you're working on your penmanship. What about spelling? How do you feel about spelling?
I feel pretty good about spelling. I'm okay, I guess. Words, if I don't really have, they don't always turn out correct, but I'm pretty good at it.
What about with story? Is there elements of story you feel like you want to improve on? Parts that
Meeting the characters at the start of like lots of chapter books. I feel like I'm not really good at meeting the person.
How do some of your favorite authors do that?
Like J.K. Rowling, she introduces you in the Harry Potter book his backstory, and then you meet him, and he just kind of tells how annoying his aunt and uncle are, and in the Harry Potter series and talks a bit about himself, and then you kind of meet him. He also describes himself.
It's kind of interwoven.
But yeah, he also describes himself without like doing it. He like says the only part about his shape, his appearance he really likes about himself is his lightning bolt scar, and he talks about how his hair is, and
So it slowly reveals details instead of just giving them in a big list at the beginning. So that's what you want to get better at doing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good goal. Okay, thanks for doing this with us.
Okay, at this point, your instructor should pause the video and get you into breakout rooms to have this first conversation. What did you hear students say? What does that tell you about what students need and what teachers need? Pause now, please. Okay, we're back. Building on hearing from Mike and Joe and Ted, I want you to also remember that these are 3 students that come from the same family. So they have obvious different experiences with learning to read. And in our house, there is books in every room. Every night we have a core routine of reading stories together. There is grandparents and aunts and uncles who have sat with our kids to read. They've been to plays, they've been to theater. We have puppets shows in our house. We have I remember reading Brown Bear to my daughter Micah at 6 months old over and over and over again. She just loved to have that read to her. I've come into the room with each of my kids, and they're very young, sitting with a pile of books on the bed, flipping through pages. And if you look at what research tells us about the different experiences of different students and the number of words that they've heard, the differences of words that they've heard, the access to books in their house, there are huge diversity of experience. And the privilege that we have to have 2 university educated parents and the financial support that we have to not be working multiple jobs and to be able to have spaces for reading and books in our home and committed, the knowledge to know how to read with our kids and write with our kids and have them see us writing and reading. We always have books on the go. If you consider that, you have students with that support coming into your class, and then you have students who don't have books in their homes and haven't seen their and have only heard a limited number of words in comparison and a limited diversity of words spoken directly to them. So their vocabularies are very different. Their understandings of story are very different. Their self-image about reading, their image of who it is that reads is very different. And so it's really important to have that recognize how important and key role the home environment plays for readiness, and again, what that means about the type of diversity of needs and experience and what your role is to support all students to be successful. Really important to hold in mind. It's also really important to hold in mind that reading and writing are really created as gatekeeper skills for success in almost all of school, including getting into university with English 30. And that plays a huge gatekeeper role, especially for English language learners, unfortunately. And what starts to happen in grades K to 3, we do learning to read. But from grade 4 up, and even starts earlier, we start really reading to learn. Science is textbooks are very text heavy. Math tests, social studies tests are in some ways reading tests, and so there's again a lot of research that shows that kids that miss some of these key scaffolding and supports and move into older grades without fluency and and accuracy and comprehension, or with gaps in their ability to express their knowledge through writing. They have lots of challenges in school. And there's lots of things we're doing to change that, and we're going to learn about that a lot in LTA and in CDPD. But it's also really important to acknowledge how important reading and writing are to success in school. And our recent government in the ministerial order, which you've read in SCMP, and our previous governments, ever since I can remember, have positioned literacy as a foundational core to what school's about. So again, hugely important for our students, for their success in school. And there's a lot of research that shows to their outcomes in life more generally that are linked to literacy. And as you read about Pablo Freire, empowering literacy is empowering people in our world. So this is of critical importance, and there's so much hope and opportunity in being a literacy teacher, especially at early ages. Okay, it's also important that I keep saying this word literacy, and it's not interchangeable with reading and writing. We're going to look at the definition from Alberta Education, but we need to think about the connection between literacy and communication, literacy and language, this ability to make sense of language and express language to others is really foundational to my understanding of literacy. Sometimes we think about this in early elementary as all about decoding text, like being able to look at symbols on the page and say in sounds what those symbols are. But just having fluency, reading fluency, is not what we need to empower students with literacy more broadly. Now, they need fluency as well as these other pieces, but comprehension and context knowledge and vocabulary play a huge role in what it means to be literate within school. And then, this other list of components. It's also I list these in part to help you see, and I think you might have seen, you'll see more in the upcoming video with Joe that you'll see next day, where he does some reading and then talks about his comprehension. These things are not developmentally are not contingent on each other. So you can be building humor and storytelling and imagination and argumentation and questioning and comprehension before you can decode text. So it's really important to remember that while we want to support decoding text, it's critical. And without that fluency, we would really get stuck with the evolving of our literacy skills. We also want to pay attention to how we're teaching literacy in broader ways. And then for a student like Micah, who no longer needs any support with decoding text, there's a lot of literacy teaching that we can do for her that are also of critical importance for her success. Okay, this is important connected to that. It's tricky, maybe impossible, to create a standardized measure of all of what literacy entails. And as you know, as we've been talking about what knowledge is most important, our CDPD key theme, and what about when we think about, across contexts and cultures? It's really important to not have a really narrow pursuit of what it means to be successful. And partly what I mean by this is assigning students a reading level, like saying that they're at level J, or a grade level that they're at 1.3, or whatever your reading assessment process yields as a way to represent where they are with decoding text, their fluency of decoding text, and separately sometimes their comprehension, is a somewhat narrow representation of what their literacy is. And not that that's not a useful piece, but it's important not to define students' identity in that way, or to define the success of one's literacy program in too narrow of a way. Think of a broad range of information that you need to collect to consider the success of literacy in your program, and think about the context. If I'm in a different community, there's different needs, and that's going to play a big role in how I think about what my role is as a literacy teacher, and with different students, what my role is and what success will look like. And I've taught with such a diverse frame of kids to know that it's really, really important not to get too narrow in what I think a vision of success is for a student or for my program. And connected to that, literacy resources that are developed to support us to build our literacy program and to support us to assess where students are and give them diagnostic for moving forward are extremely useful. And we're going to introduce you to a number of them in CDPD 500 and some more of them in CDPD 600, and you'll get probably some of the similar ones and some different ones in your practicum. And it's important that you hear me say that literacy resources are hugely important. However, it doesn't sell a great literacy program with the whole front matter preamble that I just outlined for you, to suggest that this is really complex and that there's multiple factors and that you need to attend to all of the complexity, and it's a lifelong journey of teaching, creating the conditions for students to be successful. Don't sell as well as saying, here's your one-stop golden ticket, silver bullet, come to Las Vegas and in a trade show floor and 2 PL days, we're going to teach you everything you need to know to create readers of all your students. That's the more provocative sales pitch in our culture. So we need to just be aware that there isn't, just like there's a single algorithm that I can tell you to teach kids to read, I also couldn't make that as a resource to sell to you. And people are going to try. And you'll buy those resources. We have some at Ambrose, you'll have some at your schools, and many of them are very helpful. And again, you just need to use them with an awareness that you have a professional responsibility to understand you're not teaching Daily 5 or Fontes and Pinnell or whatever diagnostic reading assessment, et cetera, et cetera. That's not what you're teaching. You're teaching literacy to your students. And so your job is to pick resources and use them in ways that, from a professional space of responsibility, that meet the needs of your learners. And that's going to require you to not think about the resources driving your teaching, but the student need is driving your teaching, and the resource being a part of the solution to that. All right, building from there, it's also really not helpful to think about developing fluency and comprehension skills as somehow in conflict with creating an identity of a student as a reader. These are both incredibly important and they support one another. The more that Joe develops his skills, the more successful he feels, the more that he builds his confidence with literacy. And the more that Joe reads beautiful books and engages in authentic literacy opportunities, writing for an audience, receiving letters, the more having conversations about books around the table, the more he wants to work on building his skills. So these things are supportive, not in conflict. And sometimes you'll hear people present them like you have to either focus on building skills or you have to focus on creating a literacy-rich love of reading in your classroom. And it just makes no sense to me. You need to do both, and you can do both, and they're really interconnected and supportive. And connected to that is Literacy is not just a bunch of skills and competencies, it's also attitudes and emotions, identity. In short, you want your students to be able to say, I'm a reader, and you want them to identify as a reader, and you want them to see themselves in relation to reading and writing. I'm a writer, I'm a reader, and you want that to become a lifelong pursuit. That's what teachers. That's what all teachers want. So we're going to listen to a little talk so that you hear another voice and from another context, a little bit about this idea of inspiring every child to be a lifelong leader. And then we're going to, after this TED Talk, you're going to consider what conditions you think you might create in your practice to help students, all students, identify as readers. And in this particular talk, there's a focus on boys, and in particular, Black boys. And I want you to think about that particular case and what this particular talk says about reaching and creating conditions for Black boys to have an identity as readers, and what some of the strategies are revealed in this talk. And then I want you to think about that in the conversation you have after the TED Talk, not just about that particular demographic of students, but think about different demographics of students and in general as well. What are some of the conditions that you feel like need to be in place? So that'll be our conversation after this video. Okay, I'm going to get your instructor to pause now and share that TED Talk and then come back for this conversation. Okay, I hope you've had a good conversation, generating some of the things you think you want to be attentive to when you think about the conditions to support the identity development of all students as readers. I feel like I've spent the whole first 14 of these slides painting the complexity of this work, and you may be saying, okay, but what should I do? Tell me what to do. So in my best, again, not having an answer for an algorithm of exactly the way to teach every kid to read, we do have lots of answers to offer you. And here's some that I hope help at this big picture framing. First off, I think connected to this idea of identity, this probably came up in your conversations. Pay attention to, honor, and respond to how students are feeling about themselves as readers and as writers and as storytellers. Just like a coach would do in an athletic situation. Know that you want to create the conditions where there's a high degree of confidence, where there's a high degree of engagement, where there's a high degree of pride in your students when they think about themselves in relation to reading, writing, storytelling, etc. And seek ways to find out how to ask them, right? Have chances for them to not just tell you what they've read, but ask you about reading and about themselves, what they like, and be able to recommend books for them and be able to introduce them to books that are important to you. And connected to that, take kids to the library and bring books into your classroom and recommend books to them and let them read them. Have time dedicated for reading. We're going to talk more about how to do that and where that fits in your program. But I can't underscore how important time for reading is to learning to read. And remembering that reading doesn't necessarily always require you to have students decoding text. They can be flipping through books, like I mentioned, my 2-year-old or even younger sitting on the bed, flipping through books, reading them. So making sure that kids have books that they love and are interested in, and thinking of those kids as individuals in relation to that, to their interests. Read your class beautiful stories. whether that introduce them to your favorite picture book artists or your favorite picture books. Have fun with reading books. Read Robert Munch with all of the glory that you can muster as an actor. Have audiobooks, listen to, share videos, have puppet shows, and then give students a variety of ways to respond to them. This was sort of what we planned as a read aloud, and we're going to continue to think about read aloud as a key strategy to balance literacy, but really paying attention to beginning to build your own interest in children's books. Start bringing children's books home from the library when you go and read them. If you have kids in your life, work on reading them, holding it the way that you would hold it, adding dramatic flair, thinking about how you make. If you haven't looked at Storyline online, it's famous actors reading stories to kids, and my kids just love watching it, and I love watching it too. And it humbles me in my ability to read stories to kids, because of course they can do such a fantastic job. But it also inspires me to be a better reader of beautiful stories for my students. It's really key to have a dedicated literacy block, which to me is going to be separate even from my ELA block, and where some schools have this where you're going to regroup and reorganize. Some groups have structures already built into their schedule, and you're going to. But what we need to focus on in our program is how to support you to think about what goes into that literacy block. And maybe I don't have that slide here, but I want to speak to also so I have a dedicated literacy block and teach literacy across the curriculum, and think about how you're building literacy skills in all of your subject areas. And we're always going to, you've already been doing some of that thinking when you've planned other lessons, and we'll continue to do that. But the provincial government policy is really clear, and so is research, that we need to be all the time teaching literacy. And you're a literacy teacher if you're a science teacher. You're always teaching literacy and thinking about how to support kids with the development of literacy in relation to the discipline and subjects that they're taking up. It's really key to design for opportunities for you to read with individuals in small groups. This is how you understand what a kid is doing with their reading and what their next steps need to be. And this is how you teach specific strategies to specific groups to help them move forward with their reading. Whole group instruction is not effective because of that diversity that we talked about earlier. So we create structures in our classroom, and again, this is what we're going to design for next week. Structures where kids have other things that are part of their balanced literacy program that they're taking up, so that you can have a horseshoe table or some sort of table set up to have at times small groups, targeted groups that are reading similar texts and or are working on similar strategies come and read with you, so that you can understand what their next steps need to be and prescribe those. So it's an ongoing process of diagnostic and prescription that is central. And when possible, reading even with individuals. Kids often say this: kids learn to read sitting on a lap with a caring adult looking at books. That's key. Okay, I talked about this already in the last slide. Most important probably to teaching students how to read is having ongoing form of assessment that leads to specific feedback for teaching. We're going to talk about how to do that, but that is pivotal. I talked about resources earlier. So important to use a range of high quality resources. There are so many great things that are developed. We're going to introduce you to some. Your school's going to introduce you to some, but seek them out. Get to know how to use them. See how they work. Be flexible with thinking of them as a critical consumer, rather than thinking that you're going to have a one-size-fits-all perfect solution, but know that there's so many great resources available, and you don't have to recreate the wheel. You don't even have to create individual, like so much of it is about curating resources, not creating resources yourself. Collaboration is really important. Collaborating with other teachers in your school. Many schools have structures where they work to problem solve around students who they're worried about with in relation to their literacy development. Many schools have people that push in to support you with strategies for certain students. Many schools do regrouping for literacy at certain times in the day so that there can be more targeted instruction towards strategies and next steps that are relevant for the group that you have. And just taking professional learning with your peers and making your literacy practice something you talk about and ask about and try to improve, rather than pretending you know it all and closing your door and just doing your own thing and hoping. Make it a public practice. Make it something that you are constantly seeking to get better at in the company of your peers. I kind of spoke about this already in a previous slide. How we can teach literacy in all subjects. We can teach these kinds of things that Micah might really need when she's thinking about her reading. We can teach scientific vocabulary. We can teach how to read as a scientist, which includes how to read figures and graphs and diagrams. Like teaching nonfiction reading skills are hugely important. Teaching how to read multiple choice questions and work through the tricks that are embedded in multiple choice. Teaching how to read word problems and create word problems in math is really important. Social studies, how to read political cartoons. Like these are we need explicit instruction on literacy in all of our subject areas, and we want to always think about in our lesson plan design and our unit plan design, where are the opportunities and where is the need to scaffold literacy skills. It's really key for me that we support students to create high quality stories and share them with an audience. Having kids make books, having kids make videos, having kids make podcasts, having kids do puppet shows, all of these, and not just leaving them to their own devices, but scaffolding the steps towards how they would do that well. Looking at exemplars, having critique and revision. These are how we, and then the audience, I can't underscore how important it is to have a real audience. So it moves beyond the game of school where some kids have already decided and already figured out that they're not going to win in that race. They are so far behind. Why are they still working hard to run? Well, they're working hard to run because they're going to tell a beautiful story to their parents, to the seniors at the local senior center, to their reading buddies, to their parent, to the elders that are coming back, the elder that's coming back to visit them. These make the strategy of making things they're proud of is really important and extends specifically to literacy. Scaffold opportunities for students to use literacy in the world. Again, if kids can receive letters, if kids can be writing to someone, if kids can be seeing adults read, if kids can see the value in using literacy in the world and participate in that value, it makes a huge, huge difference. And that can be embedded in other things. So in social studies, how necessary is it to communicate with others and building in all of our subject areas, building opportunities to use literacy skills in the world to show that relevance and importance and authenticity. this is big to me. We want to make sure that we're building the capacity of all stakeholders to understand our literacy practice, to understand the why, the how, and the what, to make sure that that we're responding to what our stakeholders are asking us. So if our principal wants you to use a common DRA program, communicating how you're going to do that and understanding what those expectations are, and make that your responsibility, and then considering that in relation to your practice and sharing back how you're using it and negotiating that with your administrator. Making sure your parents at the beginning of the year are really clear on what your literacy practices look like and why that, what you believe about reading and writing and literacy, and how you pay attention to that, and what time you dedicate to it, and what programs you're using and why you're using them, and doing that in parent-friendly language is really key. What they might do and providing supports for them where possible is also a key piece of communicating your literacy practice and supporting students. And then with students, making sure that they feel like they're a part of this process, that together you're working towards this journey of building literacy for them, and they know why, and they know how, and they know what they need to be doing towards their journey. I talked about communicating with parents. It's also key to try not to judge parents. It's sometimes challenging when we think from whatever experience we've had in the world, and then when parents have other expectations and other experiences or other realities, and you see that influencing kids in ways, and you feel like it's easy to sometimes want to offload stuff to parents, to make the parents into the excuse, to give them expectations. Oh, we're going to have this home reading program. I think instead you want to get to know what their needs are. Meet them in the ways that you can. Understand that maybe they have 2 or 3 jobs, and they simply don't have the time to fill in the home read program and sit with their child and read. Or they don't have the knowledge, or they're asking you for spelling tests and scores because they want their child to race to the top. Rather than making a judgment about that, try to understand their need, not think that what you have to do is give them exactly what they want, because that can be, first of all, inappropriate in some cases, other times just not doable, other times not matching what you know is your professional responsibility or what is best, but not discarding what they like. So it's not fully accepting nor fully rejecting what they think they need, but getting to know what those are, and then finding ways to communicate what you're doing in relation to those needs, and trying to figure out what you might ask them to do that would fit with what their realities are, towards a shared goal of supporting students in their learning journey. And thinking about that, like the parent-teacher partnership towards moving, understanding what needs are of students and what levers there are that you can use to support that is really the positionality that you should take in relation to parents in literacy. Okay, mostly this was big picture. Make this one of your key professional growth areas. Make this something you're paying attention to in our program. The extra PDs that come across, take these when you're thinking about what reading you want to do, or what resources you want to explore, what volunteering you want to do, whatever opportunities you have. Make sure this is on the front burner and keep it there. And because of how important it is, because of how wonderful it is, and because of how complex it is. Okay, the last thing here for this opportunity is for you to take up these questions, and the instructor is going to invite you, give you instructions for how to do that next. Next time you'll hear from me will be next week, when we get a chance to hear Joe read, and talk about his book, and you'll do a reading assessment for Joe, and then plan for what you think he needs to do next, and build a lesson plan around not just him, but a whole class, but with him as one example of what you're designing for. Thanks for hanging in there, assuming you're still listening, and I look forward to feedback on what your learning needs are, and building that for you in the coming stages of our program. Talk soon.